When we learned about using information from articles, we talked about the sample in the context of generalizability. The process of collecting that sample is frequently referred to as sampling or recruitment. Another way to think about it is that sampling is the way we go about gathering participants for our study. In this section, we'll talk about some of the options, including both terminology and related processes. The first question we need to ask is, does everyone in the population have a chance to be included? If so, we'll use one of the techniques referred to as probability sampling or representative sampling. If not, we'll use a non-probability technique, which is also called non-representative. Even when we have the ability to select from the entire population, we may use different techniques to ensure a representative sample given our population of interest. The most basic technique is what we refer to as simple random sampling. Like a lottery, everyone has an equal chance of being selected, and there aren't any other considerations. If we're interested in understanding the personality characteristics of pediatricians, for example, we would obtain a list of all licensed pediatricians and use a random number table or another method to select our participants. Stratified random sampling is a little more complex and is used when we are concerned about representation from particular demographic groups. In that case, it's like having a member of each category in separate buckets and randomly selecting from those buckets. If we continue with the example of pediatricians, we might be especially interested in making sure we have representation from doctors practicing in rural, suburban, and urban areas. In that case, we would use our list of physicians and sort them by location, then randomly select the same number from each setting. Cluster sampling is similar to simple random sampling, but in this case, we're randomly selecting a group rather than an individual member of the population. Then we collect data from the entire group. For example, if our population of interest was peanut M&Ms, we would randomly select a package of M&Ms and collect data from all of the M&Ms in the package. For a pediatrician example, this would be like using a list of all pediatric practices and randomly selecting a certain number of practices, then gathering data from all of the doctors in those practices. Multi-stage sampling adds another step to cluster sampling by taking a random sample from the randomly selected cluster. If we continue with the M&Ms example, this would mean that we would then randomly select M&Ms from our package or packages. For a pediatrician example, we would start like we did for cluster sampling and randomly select a certain number of pediatric practices. But instead of gathering data from all of the doctors in those practices, we would select randomly doctors within those practices. We also have a few approaches for obtaining a non-probability sample. When we use a convenience technique, we're approaching it just as it sounds. We're gathering data from people who are convenient to access. Our friends and family are often invited to participate in research using a convenient sample. Purposive sampling involves gathering data from particular kinds of people in a way that does not result in a random sample. This sometimes includes literally placing advertisements saying who we're looking for individuals who fit certain criteria. For example, if we return to our example of pediatricians, if we placed advertisements in the newspaper of the American Academy of Pediatrics requesting participation, we would be using purposive sampling. Snowball sampling is a variation on purposive sampling, where we ask participants to recommend other participants. For example, we might ask the pediatricians who complete our survey to forward an email to other pediatricians. Remember in the first unit, I mentioned that it's important to use the word experiment accurately given the meaning of that word in research methods? The same goes for the word random. In day-to-day use, we don't tend to use the word random in the same way we mean it here. That can create a problem because it can be tempting to describe a convenient sample by saying we asked random people to participate. But that would not represent random sampling.